If you rewind the clock to late 2018 and examine the geopolitical dynamic in the dark, freezing waters of the Sea of Japan, or the East Sea depending on who you ask, you will see a picture that absolutely delighted the strategic planners sitting in the Central Military Commission in Beijing. During a tense encounter, a South Korean naval destroyer allegedly locked its fire control radar directly onto a Japanese maritime patrol aircraft. The diplomatic fallout was immediate, vicious, and deeply toxic. Accusations flew. Apologies were demanded and denied. Trade disputes were initiated. Intelligence sharing agreements were nearly ripped to shreds. For the Chinese Communist Party and the Kim regime in North Korea, this incident was the ultimate validation of their grand strategy in the Pacific. Their master plan relied heavily on the concept of divide and conquer. Beijing knew that if the United States ever managed to seamlessly unite the industrial, technological, and military might of the Republic of Korea with the geographic depth and maritime power of Japan, the resulting trilateral alliance would be mathematically unbeatable. It would form an impenetrable wall of democratic steel right on China's doorstep. But Beijing believed that would never happen. They believed the ghosts of the Second World War, the territorial disputes, and the bitter historical animosity between Seoul and Tokyo were permanent, unbridgeable chasms. They banked their entire strategy for dominating the first island chain on the assumption that if they invaded Taiwan, South Korea would legally block the US from using its Korean bases, and Japan would refuse to aid a South Korean military under fire. They assumed the free world was fundamentally divided by its own history. But if you look at the skies over the Korean Peninsula and the Philippine Sea today, that assumption has been violently, spectacularly incinerated. You will look up and see a United States Air Force B-52 Stratofortress, a nuclear-capable strategic bomber, flying in perfect tight formation. Flanking its left wing are F-35A Lightning II stealth fighters of the Republic of Korea Air Force. Flanking its right wing are F-35A stealth fighters of the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force. Below them, American supercarriers, South Korean Aegis destroyers, and Japanese helicopter carriers are cutting through the waves as a single, integrated, heavily armed armada. The historical feud is over. The hatchet has been buried. The free world has looked at the existential threat rising from authoritarian Asia and decided that survival is vastly more important than history. The Asian NATO is no longer a political buzzword. It is a kinetic, heavily armed reality. And it is Beijing's ultimate strategic nightmare. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are analyzing the most significant geopolitical realignment in the Indo-Pacific since the end of the Cold War. Here is the thesis for this episode. You cannot deter a unified, industrialized superpower with a fragmented network of bilateral treaties. To stop the Chinese military machine, the West had to evolve from a hub-and-spoke system into a fully integrated, borderless mesh network of allied lethality. If you are beginning to understand why the true balance of power is not decided by diplomatic posturing, but by the relentless integration of supply chains, advanced sensors, and trilateral combat operations, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the media spin and the political rhetoric to bring you the cold, hard, kinetic realities of how the free world actually fights, builds, and teeters. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For decades, the United States served as the sole bridge between Japan and South Korea. But the sheer scale of the missile threats emanating from Pyongyang and the naval buildup emanating from Beijing has forced a radical evolution. We are going to break down the death of divide and conquer, the historic, structural shift that legally and politically bound these two Asian titans together. We are going to analyze the Freedom Edge Armada, the multi-domain combat rehearsals proving that this alliance is ready to fight tonight. We will explore the real-time kill chain, how the instantaneous sharing of classified radar data creates an omniscient digital brain that adversaries cannot blind. And finally, we will look at the industrial awakening, how Japan's pivot to offensive weaponry, combined with South Korea's roaring defense factories, creates an unbeatable arsenal of democracy in the Pacific. Let us begin by examining the monumental diplomatic breakthrough that shattered China's strategic assumptions and laid the foundation for the Asian NATO. The historical vulnerability. To truly appreciate the magnitude of what the United States, Japan, and South Korea have achieved, you must first understand the depth of the fracture they had to heal. The military architecture of the Pacific was fundamentally different from the architecture of Europe. After World War II, the United States successfully marshaled the nations of Europe into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a massive, multilateral alliance where an attack on one was legally an attack on all. The European nations, despite centuries of brutal warfare, unified under a single command structure to face the Soviet threat. In the Pacific, this did not happen. The United States built what was known as the hub and spoke system. Washington was the hub, and it held individual bilateral defense treaties with Tokyo, Seoul, Manila, and Canberra, the spokes. The fatal flaw of this system was that the spokes did not connect to each other. The lack of connection between Japan and South Korea was the most glaring and dangerous vulnerability in the entire American security umbrella. The historical grievances stemming from the Japanese colonization of the Korean Peninsula from 1910 to 1945 cast a long, dark shadow over their modern relationship. Disputes over historical apologies, compensation for forced labor, and territorial claims over the Dokdo/Takeshima Islands continuously poisoned the political well. Whenever a South Korean president or a Japanese prime minister attempted to forge closer military ties, domestic political factions would weaponize these historical grievances to sabotage the effort. The General Security of Military Information Agreement, SOMIA, a basic intelligence sharing pact between the two nations, was constantly used as a political football, threatened with cancellation at the slightest diplomatic provocation. For the strategic planners in Beijing and Pyongyang, this animosity was a strategic gift. It meant that in the event of a regional war, the U.S. military would be forced to operate two completely separate, redundant, and potentially conflicting logistical and command structures right next to each other. If China attacked Taiwan, they operated under the assumption that South Korean domestic politics would prevent U.S. forces based in Korea from intervening. If North Korea attacked the South, Pyongyang assumed Japan would drag its feet in providing rear-echelon logistical support to the Americans. The authoritarian powers built their entire timeline for conquest around this democratic dysfunction. They believed that when the pressure mounted, the Asian democracies would turn on each other. The Camp David catalyst. That authoritarian fantasy officially died in August 2023, deep in the Catoctin Mountains of Maryland. At the Camp David presidential retreat, U.S. President Joe Biden, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida convened for a summit that fundamentally rewired the geopolitical circuitry of the Indo-Pacific. This was not a standard diplomatic meeting, it was a structural locking mechanism. The three leaders recognized that the threat environment had deteriorated so rapidly, with North Korea testing solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles and China executing unprecedented encirclement drills around Taiwan, that their nations could no longer afford the luxury of historical grudges. The spirit of Camp David joint statement established a new highly formalized trilateral security framework. But more importantly, it established the commitment to consult. While stopping short of a NATO-style Article 5 mutual defense guarantee, which remains politically impossible due to Japan's constitution and domestic constraints in both nations, the commitment to consult is the closest the Pacific has ever come to a unified defense pact. It formally obligates the United States, Japan, and South Korea to rapidly coordinate their responses to any regional challenge, provocation, or threat affecting their collective interests and security. It legally and procedurally entwines their national security apparatuses. They established multi-year schedules for joint military exercises, agreed to regular, formalized summits at the highest levels of government and military command, and cemented their intelligence sharing protocols. The goal of Camp David was to institutionalize the alliance. They designed the agreements to be so deeply embedded into the bureaucratic, military, and digital infrastructure of all three nations that future politicians, who might be tempted to exploit anti-Japanese or anti-Korean sentiment for domestic political points, would find it impossible to untangle the knot without causing catastrophic damage to their own national security. They built a geopolitical firewall. By formally linking the defense of Seoul to the defense of Tokyo, and embedding both within the American strategic umbrella, they eradicated Beijing's divide-and-conquer strategy overnight. The three separate spokes were finally forged into a single impenetrable shield. The kinetic rehearsal. Diplomatic treaties signed on paper are meaningless unless they are backed by heavily armed platforms operating in physical space. To convince authoritarian regimes that the Asian NATO is real, the Trilateral Alliance had to put steel in the water and fighter jets in the air. They had to prove that they could fight together. This brings us to the operational reality of Exercise Freedom Edge. Initiated in the summer of 2024 and rapidly expanding in scope and complexity, Freedom Edge is the ultimate kinetic manifestation of the Camp David Agreement. For decades, the U.S. conducted massive bilateral exercises with South Korea, like Ulchi Freedom Shield, to prepare for a land war against the North, and separate bilateral exercises with Japan, like keen sword, to prepare for maritime defense against China. Freedom Edge merges these distinct battlegrounds into a single, seamless, multi-domain trilateral wargame. This is not a photo opportunity where ships sail in a straight line for the cameras. This is a high-intensity, unscripted rehearsal for World War III. It is designed to test the absolute limits of interoperability across the air, sea, underwater, and cyber domains. Look at the composition of the armada that took to the waters south of Jeju Island and into the East China Sea. At the center of the formation was a United States Navy Nimitz-class nuclear-powered supercarrier, such as the USS Theodore Roosevelt or the USS George Washington, carrying a massive air wing of F/A-18 Super Hornets and E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes. Sailing in direct coordination with the American carrier was the JS Izumo or JS Kaga of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Massive helicopter carriers that have been painstakingly converted to operate fifth-generation F-35B stealth fighters. Completing the Trident was the Republic of Korea Navy COE Ryu Song-ryong, a 10,000-ton heavily armed Sejong the Great-class guided missile destroyer, boasting an arsenal of 128 vertical launch cells and the advanced Aegis combat system. When Beijing's satellite reconnaissance looked down at this formation, they were not looking at three separate navies. They were looking at a singular, combined fleet that possessed more magazine depth, superior sensor fusion, and vastly more combat experience than the entire People's Liberation Army Navy. The Trident of the Pacific. The tactical objectives of Freedom Edge reveal exactly how the Trilateral Alliance intends to decapitate an adversary in a high-end conflict. The exercises focused ruthlessly on interchangeable operations. In a high-intensity war, national silos are a death sentence. If a South Korean destroyer detects a Chinese nuclear ballistic missile submarine, SSBN, slipping through a strategic choke point, but cannot securely communicate that tracking data to a Japanese anti-submarine helicopter hovering nearby, the enemy escapes. Freedom Edge obliterates those silos. During these massive drills, the three navies conduct complex, integrated anti-submarine warfare, ASW, tracking. American P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft drop sonobuoys, process the acoustic data, and instantly relay the firing solutions to Japanese destroyers and South Korean frigates simultaneously. They are hunting as a single coordinated pack. Furthermore, the exercises validate the concept of cross-decking and shared logistics. The ability for a U.S. Navy MH-60 or Seahawk helicopter to land on a Japanese flight deck, refuel, receive updated targeting data, and launch back into the fight without returning to its home carrier exponentially increases the combat radius and resilience of the entire fleet. But the most critical aspect of the Freedom Edge Armada is its ability to project overwhelming multinational offensive power. When U.S. Air Force B-52 strategic bombers, B-1B Lancers, or B-2 Spirits fly into the region from Guam or the continental United States, they are no longer flying alone. They are met and escorted by a combined phalanx of Japanese and South Korean F-35 stealth fighters and F-15s. This combined strike package represents a level of lethality that no air defense network on Earth can easily process. The stealth fighters act as the vanguard, using their advanced sensors to map the enemy's anti-access/area denial, A2/AD, network, jamming radars and clearing the airspace, while the massive American strategic bombers move into position to unleash swarms of long-range standoff cruise missiles. By executing Freedom Edge, the US, Japan and South Korea are proving that their combined forces are not just interoperable on a theoretical level, they are tactically synchronized. They have forged the Trident of the Pacific, and they are demonstrating their willingness to drive it directly into the heart of any authoritarian aggression. Fusing the digital brain. The massive ships and the fifth-generation stealth fighters are the visible muscle of the Asian NATO, but the true terror for Beijing and Pyongyang lies in the invisible digital nervous system that connects them. In modern warfare, possessing the best missile in the world is completely useless if your radar cannot see the target fast enough to calculate an intercept. The battle for the Indo-Pacific will be won or lost in milliseconds. For years, the free world operated with a massive self-inflicted blind spot. When North Korea test-fired a ballistic missile, or when China conducted aggressive missile drills over Taiwan, the United States, Japan and South Korea all tracked the launch using their own highly advanced, sovereign sensor networks. South Korea, positioned directly on the border, utilized its powerful land-based Green Pine early warning radars and its Aegis destroyers to detect the initial launch and the critical boost phase of the missile as it climbed into the atmosphere. Japan, positioned further east, utilized its own Aegis destroyers, FPS-5 land-based radars, and satellite links to track the mid-course, and the terrifying terminal phase of the missile as it plunged toward the ocean or the Japanese home islands. The United States utilized its massive space-based infrared system, SPIRS, satellites to detect the thermal bloom of the launch from space. All three nations possessed a piece of the puzzle, but incredibly, because of the lingering political animosity and the lack of integrated architecture, they did not share this data instantaneously. They processed the data in their own national silos, evaluated the threat independently, and then slowly shared the analysis after the fact. In a scenario involving a barrage of hypersonic glide vehicles or a mass launch of solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles (ICBMs), that latency is fatal. A delay of 20 seconds in sharing radar tracks can mean the difference between a successful intercept and the vaporization of a major city. Recognizing this catastrophic vulnerability, the Trilateral Alliance executed the most critical technological leap in their history. In late 2023, they officially activated the Trilateral Real-Time Ballistic Missile Warning System. They took the raw, unvarnished, highly classified radar data from South Korean sensors, Japanese sensors, and American space and naval assets, and routed it directly into a single, unified, secure digital hub based at the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii. The millisecond advantage. This activation represents the fusion of three separate militaries into a single, omniscient digital brain. The mechanics of this real-time kill chain are the ultimate countermeasure against authoritarian missile blackmail. Now, if a transporter erector launcher, TEL, rolls out of a cave in North Korea or deep within the Chinese mainland and fires a ballistic missile, the system reacts instantaneously. The intense heat of the rocket motor is immediately detected by an American early warning satellite. Milliseconds later, a South Korean land-based radar locks onto the rising trajectory, calculating the speed and the initial heading. Instead of remaining siloed in Seoul, that precise, fire control quality tracking data is beamed instantaneously across the secure Link 16 network. Before the missile has even left the Earth's atmosphere, the combat computers aboard a Japanese Maya-class Aegis destroyer operating in the Sea of Japan, and an American Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating near Okinawa, receive the exact coordinates. The Japanese and American commanders are looking at the exact same radar track, generated by a South Korean sensor, on their own tactical displays in real time. Because they possess the full flight profile of the threat from the moment of launch, the Japanese and American ships do not have to wait for the missile to crest the horizon to begin their engagement sequence. They can instantly prioritize the threat, calculate the optimum intercept point in space, and launch their massive SM-3 Block IA kinetic interceptor missiles to destroy the incoming warhead in the exosphere. This unified kill chain completely nullifies the element of surprise. It means that China and North Korea can no longer rely on the geographical blind spots between their adversaries. If Beijing attempts a saturation strike to overwhelm the defenses of the first island chain, they are not just trying to overwhelm the radars of Japan, they are trying to overwhelm the combined, overlapping, infinitely redundant sensor grid of the entire Trilateral Alliance. By fusing their digital brains, the US, Japan, and South Korea have ensured that if one nation sees the threat, every nation can shoot it down. They have achieved the holy grail of modern air and missile defense, and they have permanently altered the mathematics of deterrence in the Pacific. Japan's offensive pivot. The diplomatic treaties and the shared data links are the foundation, but a military alliance must ultimately be measured by its ability to generate, sustain, and project overwhelming kinetic violence. The Asian NATO is currently undergoing a staggering, historic military-industrial awakening that is fundamentally changing the balance of hard power in the Eastern Hemisphere. We are witnessing the fusion of two of the most heavily industrialized, technologically supreme economies on the planet turning their massive resources toward the machinery of war. For 70 years, the Japanese self-defense forces operated strictly as a shield. Bound by their pacifist Article 9 constitution, they possessed no offensive strike capabilities. They relied entirely on the United States to be the sword. But the unprecedented, aggressive militarization of China forced Tokyo to abandon its pacifist illusions. In a monumental shift, Japan announced it would double its defense budget, bringing it in line with the NATO standard of 2% of GDP. This transforms Japan into the third largest military spender on Earth. But it is not just about spending more money, it is about buying different weapons. Japan is acquiring counter-strike capabilities. They have shattered the taboo of offensive weaponry. Tokyo is purchasing 400 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles from the United States, giving Japanese destroyers the ability to strike command and control bunkers and missile bases deep inside the Chinese mainland or North Korea from over 1,000 miles away. Simultaneously, the titans of Japanese heavy industry like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, MHI, are aggressively expanding the range and stealth capabilities of their domestic Type 12 surface-to-ship missiles, turning them into long-range autonomous apex predators. Furthermore, Japan has revolutionized its command structure, establishing a Joint Permanent Operational Command (JJOC) to seamlessly integrate its ground, maritime, and air forces, allowing them to fight alongside U.S. forces not as a subservient auxiliary, but as a fully capable, highly lethal partner. The Japanese shield has finally forged a sword, the K-defense juggernaut. While Japan transitions to an offensive posture, the Republic of Korea is rapidly establishing itself as the roaring, hyper-efficient arsenal of democracy for the entire free world. South Korea never enjoyed the luxury of a peacetime dividend. Because they have lived with the artillery of Pyongyang pointed at their capital for 70 years, they never dismantled their heavy military-industrial complex. Today that sector, known as K-defense, is a global juggernaut. While shipyards and tank factories in the United States and Europe are plagued by massive delays, cost overruns and supply chain fragility, the massive chaebols of South Korea, companies like Hanwha Aerospace, Hyundai Rotem, and Korea Aerospace Industries (KAI), are churning out advanced weaponry at a speed that terrifies Western adversaries. South Korea is mass-producing the K-2 Black Panther, arguably one of the most advanced, highly automated main battle tanks on the planet. They are producing fleets of the K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzer, which has become the undisputed gold standard for NATO and allied artillery forces. They are launching advanced KDDX-class stealth destroyers and developing the KF-21 Boramae, a cutting-edge 4.5 generation fighter jet. The brilliance of the K-defense industry lies in its relentless efficiency and its massive economies of scale. Because they maintain hot production lines and a massive, highly skilled workforce that rotates between commercial shipbuilding and naval construction, South Korea can build weapons faster and cheaper than anyone else in the democratic world. When you look across the water at this new trilateral alliance, this is the ultimate industrial nightmare for the authoritarian regimes. Beijing is no longer just facing the exquisite silver bullet technology of the United States military. They are facing the American spearhead, backed by the rapidly expanding offensive missile arsenal of a rearmed Japan, all sustained by the massive, relentless high-volume production lines of the South Korean defense industry. It is the fusion of Silicon Valley innovation, Japanese precision engineering, and South Korean heavy industrial mass. The Asian NATO is not a formal treaty organization with a headquarters in Brussels. It does not require a complex, bureaucratic charter to exist. It is something much more primal, much more kinetic, and vastly more dangerous to the authoritarian ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party. It is an alliance forged by the brutal necessity of survival. For decades, Beijing and Moscow assumed they held the winning hand. They assumed they could intimidate the smaller nations of the Pacific, exploit their historical divisions, and force the United States into an unwinnable, isolated conflict. They assumed the democratic world was too soft, too distracted, and too fragmented to build a unified wall. They were catastrophically wrong. The aggression of the No Limits Partnership achieved the exact opposite of its intended goal. It forced the two most capable democracies in Asia to look past the bitter ghosts of the 20th century and recognize the existential threat of the 21st. By executing massive integrated operations like Freedom Edge, and by fusing their radar networks into a real-time omniscient kill chain, the United States, Japan, and South Korea have built a borderless military architecture. They have standardized their operations, synchronized their intelligence, and unleashed their massive industrial potential. When adversaries look at the first island chain today, they do not see a fractured network of vulnerable outposts. They see an interlocking, highly industrialized wall of steel. They see a multi-front nightmare where a single provocation guarantees a synchronized, devastating response from the three most technologically advanced nations on the Pacific Rim. The era of divide and conquer is dead. The Asian NATO has arrived, and the free world is ready to hold the line. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe this trilateral alliance can survive the turbulent domestic politics of Tokyo, Seoul, and Washington? Or is the Asian NATO destined to fracture when tested by a real crisis? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay unified, and we'll see you in the next one.